Welcome to another episode of the Afterlife podcast. This is your host, Pooja Chilukuri. Today, I am delighted to be in conversation with Jill Brennan. Jill is joining us all the way from UK, so I really appreciate her taking her time today to speak to us. We're going to be talking about non-duality. We're going to be exploring reconnective healing. We're going to be talking about near-death experiences, and we're going to be talking about non-duality specifically in the context of Christian thought. Jill is a reconnective healing practitioner and faith shift mentor, supporting people through deconstruction towards personal awakening. An ex-ordained Christian minister, she is also a teacher, published author, and educational consultant specializing in the use of visualization for the spiritual development for children. She holds a master's degree in theology and religious studies, writing her thesis on the universality of mystical experience. She continues to explore reframing the life and teachings of Jesus from a non-dual perspective on her YouTube channel, Nondual Christian. And that is how I found you, Jill. Welcome to this show.
Thank you very much. An honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No, thank you. We have a lot of things to unpack today.
Mm.
But my first question for you is, what led you to explore the teachings of Jesus from a non-dual perspective?
Okay, well, I think that my upbringing was introduced me to Jesus. I was brought up in the Salvation Army, which I have a lot of respect for because it emphasizes knowing Jesus personally. And so, as a young child, I was introduced to that, and I really did have this connection. There are a couple of things that come to mind from childhood, if I can just mention them briefly, because they're relevant. One is as possibly a 4 or 5 year old. My father was the choir leader, and there was a song they used to sing, and it was called Remember Me. And in the song, it was really saying, remember, it was a prayer to Jesus to say, remember me. But I, in my own mind, thought that it was about Jesus saying, remember me when he did the Last Supper, because I'd heard the Bible story. And possibly because of the music and the way it was sung, it always made me feel like I wanted to cry. This was as a 5 year old. I couldn't understand that. I didn't know about anything spiritual. It wasn't something I was understanding with the head. It was of the heart, because I thought, well, why am I crying? I'm not upset. I'm not disappointed. Nothing bad has happened. So it didn't make sense. It just was a connection, and it was a physical reaction in the body, that it was visceral, that it would have that effect on me. I remember another time when I was about 13, and my friends and I must have been talking about Ouija boards and things at school, and we came home, and I was one of those latchkey kids that gets home about an hour before parents arrive at home. So we let ourselves in. Must have written some alphabet letters, put them down on the kitchen floor or whatever, and we got a glass, and whatever we were doing, we were just messing about and having fun at the beginning. And then suddenly, as the glass started moving, I just had a sense this is not right. Don't want to be doing this. And I said to my friend, you're going to have to go. You're going to have to go. I don't want to do this anymore. And she just laughed it off. But the minute she'd gone, I went into the bathroom and I was physically sick. I wasn't even feeling ill that day. Those two things told me I was frightened. I thought this isn't right. And it felt like something evil. So I was praying and just saying the Lord's Prayer, remembering my connection to Jesus, talking to Jesus. And it went away, and I never spoke about it. No one ever, never told my parents anything. But that again was visceral. It was in the body. And I think that it taught me that this idea of Jesus being in here, being in me, not being anything, but it was just with me, and would be a guide so that I could just trust that connection to Jesus, was there from a very early age. But in terms of your question about non duality, this links to healing. It links to a situation that happened probably when I was about 15, and my dad was suddenly taken seriously ill with a stroke. And it was a severe stroke. I mean, we were lucky that he didn't die at the time, and he didn't die. He recovered in the sense he lived another 30 years, but he never regained his speech or the use of his limb. He was disabled. And I remember at the time the minister at our church, the Salvation Army, saying to me, you must prepare that your dad won't get better and that things are going to change drastically for your mum and you need to be there to support your mum. And I remember thinking that why are you so sure about that? I don't believe that. I'm going to, we can pray about this because Jesus was a healer. And I remember making a little like scrapbook of all the sayings of Jesus and how healing is on every page and all the promises. And I just didn't want to accept that healing wasn't possible and prayed and he didn't get better. I mean, he wasn't suffering, but he never returned to his what he was before. And I think that started me off thinking, asking about this interventionist God. I think this was the beginning of that deconstruction of faith, which is about God making a choice whether or not to answer certain prayers or not. Why is God not answering my prayer? And then that can take you down a route of thinking, is it something in me? Is it some sin? Is it something I've done? Is it some blockage that needs clearing? And you can punish yourself with that for years. And it makes God feel as though then he is this Zeus figure in the sky, this being who is making a choice, as I've said, about our lives, wanting to control us, having a plan for us. It feels controlling and narcissistic and not very loving. Because I think that if you can perceive of somebody, a person who is more loving than God seems to be, there's something wrong with the theology. And I knew that Jesus wouldn't reject the prayer. If Jesus were here, Jesus wouldn't not heal my dad because he was a good man, Not that he only would heal good people. It just started me thinking about all of these big questions about suffering and theodicy, but it was all related to healing. And much later, it was for my own healing because I have a condition with my eyesight, condition that's quite rare called keratoconus, and I was diagnosed with that at the age of 16, so not much longer. Suddenly my dad wasn't there to talk about it to my mum was in a state because she was struggling with adapting to this big life change and being a carer and dad not being there. So it was a really difficult time. And I was going to the consult and going to the hospital on my own, having these tests and things and being told I had this rare disease and it could be devastating. Anyway, it turned out I did have surgery. I've had 2 corneal grafts now, but at the time I was really scared about it, about losing my sight. And so that was another thing that I prayed for. And fast forward even, to the age of about mid-30s, I remember going to church for some healing for my eyes. And it was actually Bethel Church. People might know and have heard of Bethel Church. It was close to where I lived. They had one, and you could go to the healing rooms. And what you do is you go and you just make a donation, and then you fill out a form, say what it is that your condition is, and then they'll pray for you. And then you go into a room, and there's a little team of them. And my first experience of that was really beautiful. I remember there was this man, and he, I don't know, in his mid-20s, something, this black guy, and he had his face just lit up when I walked in. It was just beautiful. And I remember noticing him and thinking, oh, I feel safe with you. You're a good person, I can just tell. And when they did the laying on of hands, it was very gentle. It was very beautiful. I felt this grace, and it was lovely. And I left and felt like spaced out. It was beautiful. A few months later, I went back for a second time, and the experience was completely different. Pooja, the guy that I'd seen there wasn't. Oh, I just remember afterwards when we did a little bit of feedback at the end, and we were just sitting around. He said to me, caught my eye, and he said, "When you walked in the room, Jesus walked in." And I can remember thinking, I saw Jesus in you. You saw Jesus in me. Wow. That was so affirming because I hadn't been anywhere near a church for at least 10 years or more. So it wasn't through that. There was something that was just there with you, that stays with you, and that he saw. I don't know. But that stayed in my mind. But my second visit was very different experience. It was There were a few of them again. Similar thing happened at the beginning, but we went into this room and it was a lady, I can't remember her name, let's call her Brenda. And she was a bit of a fluster because she was late and she hadn't, she'd lost her keys and she needed to go and move her car and whatever. So it all started a little bit more, not as calm. But she was asking me all kinds of questions that were really quite invasive, really, that was obviously trying to relate it to why I had this problem with my vision. Questions about my first marriage, questions about whether I think she even said, did you ever wish your husband was dead? Because my husband died young. And she, that must have been something that I shared. Unexpectedly, he died young. So to ask me this, and what's the implication there that somehow I caused his death, or I don't know what that was all about. But even when it wasn't this gentle laying on of hands. It was, pushing fingers against my head and in the name of Jesus, in the name of, and doing all of this. And even the others around her were saying, Brenda, that's enough. But the whole thing was quite traumatic. And after I couldn't get out quick enough, my husband was waiting in the car, and I said, "Get me out of here, never again." And I think that confirmed for me that that there wasn't this sort of quality control. It could be very different from one day to the next, depending on people, and that it wasn't for me, the church. I think I felt this calling to go into to healing. I just had this thing about healing because of my own need, my own history with my dad. But it became part of my spiritual search. This healing, and so I think that made the decision that it wasn't going to be within the church, that I wanted to do healing. And somebody said to me, what about Reiki? And I looked into Reiki. I had a friend who was a Reiki practitioner. And I wanted to understand where it had originated and everything about it. And when I saw that it was from a different culture, completely different Eastern, Japanese, it began, and that it was involved masters who would then, you would have a master, you would choose a master who you'd feel called to or aligned with, and they would put their hands on you, almost a little bit like the priestly, the
Yeah.
succession almost, that you would have some kind of activation through them. And I think this was in so many stages, and it all seemed a little bit, I didn't feel right about it. I can remember talking to Jesus, and because it's quite natural to talk to Jesus, even through when I was completely away from the church, it always is there from childhood. And I remember just saying, I don't want another master. I know that there are some things now that I have stepped away from in terms of faith and even belief. I don't believe in this interventionist God. I don't, these bits of doctrine, they're all, lots of them have fallen away or I'm questioning them. But I never pulled back on my connection to Jesus and my love for Jesus. So you're my master of choice, and I've only got one master that I want to serve. And so I don't feel I want to give my loyalty or allegiance anywhere else. It doesn't feel right. So it's you or nothing. And I think that might have been the stage actually at which I looked at the church, but obviously I'd said no to that. So I just said, it's back to you, show me, show me. And then I found on the internet, I stumbled across a book called The Reconnection by Eric Pearl, Heal Others, Heal Yourself. And it was that subtext, heal others, heal yourself. That's, I thought, oh, maybe this doesn't need it, to go through another mediator if this is direct path to healing. And I read the book and I resonated with it because it wasn't sort of woo-woo stuff. There wasn't a lot of techniques to learn. There wasn't a belief system that was part of it. He was a chiropractor, and it was more to do with vibration and energy. And he was trying to take it more in, I suppose, a quantum way or just a scientific way. He was wanting to keep it quite scientific, but it was nevertheless a phenomena that he was experiencing and developing and training other people to do. But one of the things it said was that even as you're reading the book, you may feel an activation. And I did. I started to feel an activation while I was reading the book. So, in view of the fact that I'd made this prayer to Jesus, and in view of the fact that I wasn't with anybody else involved, it was just myself in my room reading this book, it got my attention.
Mm-hmm.
You could even, at the end of the book, it was saying, try these things with family, try them out, just playing with the energy. And they were starting to feel something when I was doing it. So when I had the opportunity to actually see Eric Pearl, he did come with his team to London. I thought, well, this is a chance to really test it out. So I did buy a ticket, went for the weekend to train as a practitioner, and that was back in 2015. And it was a way of saying to, I was praying for, look, if is this right? There was still the Christian in me that was thinking, is this wrong? Is this a bit new age? Should I not be going here? You know how it is. You've been
Mhm.
there. And so it was a case of testing it out. And it was funny thing is when I went for the weekend, I actually stayed at the training college of the Salvation Army. So it was quite funny that I was part of the old camp there, and then I was exploring something quite new in the day and going back there at night. But certainly by the second day, and what I was seeing in the way that people were responding, people were just crying. It felt very similar to what I'd experienced previously of, I can only say, and you'll understand this, of the Holy Spirit. When you're in a gathering and the Holy Spirit is present and moving, and you just sense it, you know it, you discern it. And this is why I gave those examples at the beginning from childhood, that I knew what the Holy Spirit felt like. I knew the difference of when something doesn't feel right and when something does feel pure and high. And this was it. And even when I was going back to my room, and it was so powerful, the heat, the tingling, the scent, you having to have a shower before you could settle for the night. So it was very strong. And I just took that as a sign that this was a part of my journey and my path to do this reconnective healing.
Mhm.
But to come back to your question about the non-duality,
Mhm.
it was because I couldn't make sense of this. People were having experiences, and sometimes this was very um, physical. They were jerking, they were thinking their bodies were moving. They said, "I'm not moving my body. I don't know what's happening there," but they were having healings. Physical healings. The good thing is with physical healings that you're able to get feedback very quickly. It's usually overnight. The next day they'll say it's gone. It's that pain has gone. Whatever it is, something has changed.
Mhm.
And obviously, the other types of healing, mental, spiritual, emotional, that's not as obvious to see and dramatic, but it's still valid. But I couldn't make sense of it because it wasn't energy going from me to the person. And Eric Pearl was really clear about this when they were teaching us. This is not something that will drain you. It's not you. Get out of the way. It's really not you.
Mhm.
And I couldn't make sense of how I could have people at the other side of the world, in Australia and America and places
Mhm.
far away, who simultaneous to me feeling an activation in my hands, they would be feeling something.
Mhm.
And it was really why I started the channel in the beginning, my YouTube channel. So I want to test this out and see if it works just when people are watching live streams, or even when people, I didn't do live streams for a while. It was even just watching videos. And even people are saying sometimes 3 years later, when they watch a video, they'll say,
Mhm.
I can feel something. I thought, how else does that work? And so this idea of there being this other field by which the separation collapses and by which there's a oneness and there's only one being here. So when I receive, you're received. That was entirely new to me.
Mhm.
Just the philosophy of that, it was completely new. That was never anything that even at university, I didn't really come across that. It was only later. It was firstly through wanting to understand this phenomena, and then through finding Rupert Spira, who was, I think, a really, really good teacher of
Mhm.
non-duality, and that introduced me to the idea. Yeah,
Wow. I'm listening to you, Jill, and I feel warm all over right now. So I guess we just proved it. No, we're
yeah,
sitting in the same field, right? Without that
yeah.
separation. Um, listening to you, because, I interview a lot of people on this channel that have had near-death experiences.
Mm,
And you are describing many of the things that they experience
mm,
after they left their bodies, when they perceived themselves not to be attached to this body anymore, and
yeah.
they were outside of it and experiencing the oneness, experiencing that lack of separation, the unconditional love.
Mm,
So it's very intriguing to me that
mm,
being in this body, being able to experience some of that while you're still in this body. So, what is your, I know you have also been watching a lot of these near-death experience stories. Do you find a connection?
Absolutely. And I love watching them because do you know what? I think that there's a similarity, and I hope you'll understand what I'm saying here. There is a similarity to when you listen to somebody giving their testimony. And I know that when somebody's had a real experience, so going back to the
Hmm.
Salvation Army, for example, when somebody's had experience of salvation, we tend to think it's about afterlife, something
Yeah.
that happens after you die. But in the Salvation Army, it's very much about transformation, so that it impacts your life. It's often working with people who really have derelict lives, and and are really struggling in some way, perhaps with addiction and all kinds of things. So there is a dramatic conversion when somebody has this change, and you see it on their faces. And the thing that they always say is, tell your story, give your testimony, because we will hold space for that. The mind will just take you maybe in a few weeks, and you might doubt yourself, but we are bearing witness to the fact that this is real, this really
Hmm.
happened. And so there'll often be a glow on their face where they're just trying to tell their story. And you get that with near death experiences. People actually are trying to tell what happened to them.
Hmm.
And what I love is that you will see them searching for the words. Sometimes their eyes just go off to the side because they are remembering the experience that's so real to them, and
Hmm.
they're struggling to put it into words. So the words are inadequate. But invariably there is a point at which the emotional just they can't speak because of the emotion that comes. So this is touching on something very real.
Hmm.
And I think that the veil, the veil is the body. The veil is the body, isn't it? I remember hearing Susan Giesman say that the veil is the body, and I never thought of that before. But it's just the physical dimension. But you will be so aware of this because of your background in Hinduism.
Hmm.
This idea of the koshas that
Yeah.
is quite new to me. I'd never heard of it until David Bingham. But the idea of there being different levels of experiencing reality,
Hmm.
and so the physical is the outer, but then there's the mental, emotional, and then there's we get the body of wisdom and the body of bliss, and these are the non-dual ways. So it's almost like taking layers off.
Hmm.
And I now sometimes think of when I come to do reconnective healing, or even when I'm just doing a video, or even meditation, that you can just in your imagination, and this is why I think imagination is such a powerful tool, just think of yourself as hanging up your clothes. Just take the body off. Take off the self, step out of the separate self of the story of Jill.
Hmm.
So you can just hang it up on the peg. It'll be there to take up. You have to take it up because I've got things to do. You've got places to go where you're needing that identity, and you couldn't function without that identity. But for the time that you're setting aside, you hang that up. And when you do that and you go into the more non-dual, it is as though you are stepping into eternity. And this idea of it being a little pocket of eternity. So we're using religious language. We can. It's almost like being bilingual. You sometimes can use the religious language, and then you can use the metaphysical language, or the psychological language, whatever it is, to say that this is, that we're just experiencing the one field. We're in that field of oneness. And as you bring your attention to that field of oneness, the separation collapses. And I believe this is more than just a metaphor of speaking. There's something ontologically true in its beingness that's real about this.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because you forget not only your own story, but the story of the other person as well. So even if it's somebody that you might, there might be a very different views to you. You might in the material, in the physical, you might think, well, I'd never really, we wouldn't get on because our views are very different. You
Hmm.
might trigger me. All of that is story. But when you step out of that and go to that place of oneness, all you're left with is just that compassion and it isn't even another person, it's that human being you just meet in that Rumi's field of oneness,
Yeah.
and and this idea that it's me that's receiving, that's almost counterintuitive. You think this person has come to me for a session, it's me that's receiving, and because I'm receiving, they are also receiving. It's like you're bearing witness to the healing. but you're both being transformed by it. Just come back just to those the near death experiences, which is what your question was. Always at the end, there's never this sense that they say, "I want to go back there." They do, but they don't. It's not made them. I've yet to hear of somebody that would say, "I don't want to be here anymore," and it's that they come back with a real sense of this really matters.
Mhm.
I get emotional when I talk about this, but this idea that there's the I don't know where it came from, but I heard one time that there's so many souls that want to be incarnated. And there's only one, there are only a limited number of incarnations that are available. So there's all these souls, but you got the gig of your life. You got that gig. And it's such a privilege and honor that you are here holding space, anchored into this dimensional reality in the physical. And we're being cheered on by all these souls, and we might talk about that a little bit about guides and so on. But this idea of being incarnate, there's something very precious about it,
Mhm.
and I think that then knowing that and listening to these stories sometimes just makes you value your life a little bit more. So rather than just comparing yourself to other, feeling that your life is worthless and pointless, and just wishing your time away or being directionless, it just makes it then feel that every day is precious, life is precious. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you just answered a question that I was going to ask. You already answered it. Because, I was going to ask you with all this, that place of bliss, that non-dual, where,
Mhm.
the divisions have collapsed, but yet the duality is so important to our
Mm.
existence here,
Yeah.
right? So that's the mystery. I think some things we'll
Yeah.
never have answers for.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. To question again for you, Jill, is with all that experience, with Jesus, with those the mystical experiences, the visceral, but when I think about religion, it's
Mm.
very dualistic to me,
Mm.
in every way,
Mm.
because of very harsh
Yeah.
boundaries, very harsh.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how have you managed to take this non-dual things and apply it to the teachings of Jesus? Because I remember from my experience, when I experienced Jesus in my body, and I tried to tell that to the pastor and the people in the
Mm.
church,
Mm.
it was a kind of pushed back, right? Like, because
Absolutely.
that's not aligning with doctrine.
Yeah.
So, and you've taken that same thing and you've got a whole channel behind that. Do you ever get pushed back? What would you say to skeptics?
Oh, yes. But I think that to begin with, I had to just completely step back. I mean, I had a long sabbatical, if you want to call it that. I had a long break from going to church. I needed to detox for a number of things. I mean, I didn't have a. I think that my first marriage was to a man who was in the church. So I thought, okay, well, he's a salvationist. He will be. I'll be safe. But he was very literal. He was quite a fundamentalist. And so I found that even I never had time off. It was always the
Mhm.
boundaries were very strong. In fact, I think, to be honest, stronger than I would generally now think of as the Salvation Army. He in
Mhm.
particular just was quite strict in his way of thinking and understanding about it. So when in that marriage ended and then I was alone on my own a little bit with my daughter. And then I met Noel. And in a way, he was more like, I used to say this to him, but he's more like Jesus than anyone I'd met before because he was just so loving. That's when I think that you can get really gaslit if you think that's love. And if you don't know anything different, then you've nothing to compare it to. But
Mhm.
it's actually a very conditional form of love, even within the church, because it's as long as you stay within these boundaries. And that was also in my marriage as well. So I
Mhm.
could never be completely real, and I would never have been given permission to explore in the way that I did. But when I'd sometimes find myself saying to Noel, my husband now, I'd used at the beginning say, well, I've got this book and I'm interested in this, or I've got these cards, but they're not new age. And I'd find myself apologizing and so trying to say, I don't think,
Mhm.
and he'd just say, you don't need to explain yourself to me. It's really fine. Stop,
And
and it took a long time for me to know that I didn't that I could just relax and go with it and
Mhm.
wasn't being censored all the time. So there was a lot of, I think, detoxing that I needed to do. And
Mhm.
a long period of time away from the church. And it's quite interesting that you say that, because only very recently I do now work for the Salvation Army, and only a few weeks ago I was having a conversation with somebody who is in leadership, in management, and I was talking about healing, but talking about it more in a way of just prayer, quietly, just doing this, having time where you sit and
Mm-hmm.
think about the person, and every time when we sit together, and I did actually tell, it was almost like confession. I told them about my reconnective healing, and it was a way of testing it, I suppose. I'm thinking, here, am I going to walk into this rejection, this rebuttal, and feeling judged again? And I didn't get it. And I think that was a real gift of grace. I just didn't get it. And it was lovely, because it was as though I could make peace in a way with I don't think it would be everyone, but in that situation, I had the chance to say it, and it was okay. But um, in terms of Christians generally, yes, I think that one of the biggest obstacles to going deeper with Jesus as a Christian is other Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And I for a long time didn't call myself Christian. I think that's why in my introduction on my channel I say, oh, it feels really weird saying Christian. And why I came to saying it, I think really for me it was a sense of a protest. What I was seeing a lot of online, I was seeing this expression of Christianity, often the ones that get most hits, actually, the biggest, like the mega churches, and
Mm-hmm.
especially the prosperity gospel, or the
Mm-hmm.
Christian nationalism, and all of these things that are really have their own agendas, often political, very worldly agendas, very materialistic, but using Jesus as a sort of mascot,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
valid, to make it seem as if it's respectable, and it's so damaging. And they are, for anyone who's experienced them, very controlling.
Mm-hmm.
And when I hear of people, there being this revival, people are finding, they're interested in Jesus, they're wanting to know about Jesus, they're becoming Christians. And so what's going to happen is they're going to start going to church, even though it's a strange and weird culture for them. Or the big churches, or they're going to be like vultures coming in and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
come and we can recruit you to. And before they know it, they'll be herded into the cult. Often it is just the Christianity rather than following Jesus. It just is very much about this is what we believe as Christians,
Mm-hmm.
which varies a great deal, as we know. I'm always saying on my channel,
Yeah.
45,000 different denominations, and they spend such a, and even within the Lord's Supper, even within the, split three ways with the
Yeah.
Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant, and not sharing table. Not
Mm-hmm.
sharing table because they believe so strongly. That's the strength of commitment to the theology
Yeah.
that is, in their view, the right theology, whereas Jesus says that, everyone's welcome at my table.
Yeah.
So I just think, stick with Jesus, stay with Jesus. And it made me want to just say, look, I'm willing to stand up and be countered and say, this is an alternative way of being a Christian. You don't have to do the
Mm-hmm.
church thing. You can if you want to, but you can Jesus is enough, just Jesus. Yeah.
And I love what you're saying, every bit of it, Jill.
Mm,
Not being welcomed at the table, all these
mm,
divisions, right? I think
mm,
what you said, it stuck in my head, the word commitment. It's like we're
mm,
committed to the duality. I think
mm,
we need the duality. It's there
mm.
for a reason, right? We
Yes,
have to live it
yes,
out. But I
yes,
think that's where we stumble, is we cling to it. And
yes,
that's the problem. And then the whole non-dual thinking, right? Then becomes inclusive and universal,
yes,
right?
yes.
Because all of us have bodies and we can experience things.
Yeah.
And what about Jesus's teachings? I know you have a lot on your channel, and I'm going to take a pause here. And people that are watching and listening, I really, really love Jill's YouTube channel. It's called Nondual Christian. I have a background in fundamental evangelical Christianity and
Mm,
Hinduism, and I was a very religious person. So I've experienced what it's like to leave the
mm,
institution, to have religious trauma, and I find
mm,
Jill's content very, very healing. So if you're listening and
mm,
watching to this, and you're someone that wants to have faith in Jesus, but the religion part has traumatized you, I highly recommend
mm.
Jill's channel.
Thank
I
you.
love your content, but I want you to share at least one teaching of Jesus that
Mm.
you hold dear that is non-dualistic.
Well, the main one that I quote a lot is when Jesus was speaking to the disciples and he said, when you do this unto one of the least of these, and he was talking about,
Mm,
the child, you give water, drink naked, person give them clothes, feed the hungry, visit the sick, you do it unto me, or you do it as unto me. Now, he could have said, you please me in when you're doing that. It's what I want you to do because I've tried to teach you ethical morality. I've tried to teach you to
wow.
be compassionate to other people.
Hmm.
Others, he didn't. He said, "You do it unto me." And
Hmm.
and in the churches in the West, it's never taught literally, ironically, because they're
Yeah.
very literal about lots of things. It's never taught that he was meaning that is me.
Hmm.
And so, if that is him, what could he? There's no other explanation than non duality, that there's one being here and that there aren't really separate people. The separation is part of the worldly thinking, but as he taught us, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. In
Hmm.
heaven is the non dual field.
Hmm.
So remember, in other words, everyone is is you. Where you love. He said, love one another as you love yourself. The
Yeah.
teaching that is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
golden rule of Judaism. And you can only you can only love others if you love yourself. But as you love yourself, it's like because it is self. There's only one self with the big S. The small separate self is
Mm.
is an illusion. And I really think he was trying to teach them that, especially with the I am sayings as well.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am. And of course, the Christians took that because the only way in a dualistic framework you can make sense of that is to think he just meant himself as a unique son of God, as
Yeah.
as God on earth walking among us for a short time and then not here, but now we have to pray to him and he's the savior that rescues us from outside of us.
Hmm.
But I think he was trying to teach us about the human being, what it means to be real, hu- an authentic
Hmm.
human being.
Hmm.
And it's the authentic human being that is the Christ. And that's how he was Jesus Christ. But it's how
Christ.
each one of us becomes the Christ, Jill Christ, Pooja Christ. It's
Yeah.
just the whole human being,
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. And that's so beautiful, Jill. When you were saying about whatever you do to others, you do to me, I had chills go through me. And the
yeah,
thought that popped in my head,
yeah,
Jesus is still suffering, therefore,
yeah,
because until the last human stops
yeah.
suffering, his suffering is never going to cease. And
Yes.
not until that day, right?
Yes,
So
he's
that
still being
just,
crucified. Yes,
yeah, yeah,
yes.
yeah, he's still suffering. Every
Yeah,
time you and I suffer, he suffers because
yes,
that's just his reality, I guess. So that
yes.
whole,
Yes, and I think that this is why there are some real mystical truths within the church. For example, at Easter, when we do the Stations of the Cross, because,
Mhm,
like you say, Christianity generally it emphasizes it as a one-off historical event, the cross. But it's actually because it's an eternal event, because it's like archetypes that just will repeat in people's lives, in the life of every human being,
mhm,
that same model. And on the Stations of the Cross, when you walk around and you think about the different stations of the cross, and it speaks to each person because there's something you can relate to and resonate with that, and that's why it is so powerful.
mhm.
And because you do relate it to just the suffering that we see in this broken world. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
And I do want to switch gears a little bit. I know you've written a book, so I do want us to talk about that because it's a book on forgiveness.
yeah,
And I know forgiveness is also one of the things that's very misunderstood. Because in my experience, when I was in church, the
yeah,
the whole burden of forgiveness was with the person that had been hurt. Because the
mm,
person that did the hurting was, oh, they're the ones that, you have to have God's
mm,
grace. They're the ones they're excused because of God's
mm,
grace. But now the burden to forgive is on you because you're the one that got hurt. So this is so
yeah,
upside down to me. Can you
yes.
talk a little bit about forgiveness and why you wrote that book?
Yes, and I'm glad because I was going to start talking about that, about the atonement theory and Ho'oponopono, and then I thought, well, I've spoken enough, and you've just asked me, so this is obviously flowing really beautifully.
Yes.
Bec- Because when we talk about Christ still being suffering and still be in the world, and we think, oh, but he's not here. He's here by every person. Like when I get
Mm,
emotional earlier, when I say about you anchoring in, because you're so the privilege of being a human being here on earth. It's a revisiting of he left his place. He incarnated. He came down to. That's what you and I are. We're the incarnation, and therefore the atonement is still taking place. This redemption process,
mhm,
and that's how I understand the Ho'oponopono. Again, when I was introduced to Ho'oponopono, I and listened to the videos of Dr. Hu Len. I could see and knew how powerful it was, and I couldn't again explain it. There was no explanation of it because he just says all the time, it's about you. It's not about other people. It's you that need to do the clearing and the cleaning. And just as you've said, in a
mhm,
dualistic framework, that doesn't make sense because it's like, well, I was the victim. In a
mhm,
non-dual sense, there isn't another, there aren't two different people.
mhm,
So the very fact of when you say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you, it's just doing that cleaning for the patterns that repeat, the patterns that are
mhm,
some in the consciousness, this collective consciousness. It's
mhm,
difficult for us to fully understand, but that's where it talks about cleaning. And it's interesting that in religious language, they talk about the blood of Jesus cleansing. So
mhm,
it's the same thing. The same thing is happening. It's just different ways of talking about it.
mhm,
So, or what I just sometimes just going back to doing the cleaning and the cleaning, that something is changing that affects the all because there is only one person here.
mhm.
From a dual point of view, it suddenly takes away that, oh, what do my prayers in a dualistic framework? What difference can my prayers make? I'm just a little person and billions
Yeah.
of people on the planet, and look at these powerful people who are destroying the world and doing this and their
Mhm,
decisions and so on, impacting everyone. And it can feel pointless and hopeless. But if you suddenly think there's one person here, then that gives in a way, it's very empowering. In fact, what's just come to my mind, and I was only looking at this passage the other day, is what they don't teach this much in preach on it in church because it's probably a difficult passage, but it's there. It's in Luke, I think, somewhere. Oh no, it's in John. I think it's when Jesus appears to the disciples and he says to them, "What you bind," he said, I'm going to,"
mm,
but he says, "What you forgive on earth." When you forgive sin, what sins you forgive will be forgiven. What sins you don't forgive will be left unforgiven.
mhm,
There's a
mhm.
passage, and we must find it and put it. I can't remember where it is because you're surprised that it was there. Because there's another passage earlier where you remember where they're lowering a person on a mat,
Yes. Yes.
and Jesus says to them, your sins are forgiven because of
Giving.
your great faith. And the Pharisees are listening in and they're saying, who is he to forgive sins?
Forgive
Only
sin.
God can forgive sins.
Yeah.
Now, Christians would preach on that and say, oh, that's because he was God. But actually, later on, Jesus actually says to his disciples in John's gospel, he says, you have the authority to forgive. I'm giving
Mhm,
you. So the point is, what is that all about? Well, maybe it's this about this cleaning. We can still do in
mhm,
that practice of Ho'oponopono, which I do talk about in the book. So it's a
mhm,
40-day introduction to Ho'oponopono. It gives you the opportunity to sort of journal, and it is just short little sections and introducing it. But I am no expert on Ho'oponopono. I will just say that for some reason I felt compelled to start writing that book. And I forget what the year even now, because you've caught me off. I can't even remember, but I do know that when I was getting it sort of wrote itself within 2 weeks. It almost felt like it just was downloaded.
downloaded.
And it was so lovely. And when I came to the bit of Dr. Hugh Len, Dr. E. Haleakala Hu Len. I don't know his first name. How do you spell it? So I looked it up on the internet, and I could not believe my eyes because it came up saying it was an immemorial, tribute to him. And I thought I
Mhm.
didn't even know he died. When did he die? And I looked at the date, and the date were literally, I think it was 3 days, 2 or 3 days before I started writing the book. And I'd no idea, no idea. And that felt like some sort of sign. I don't know how. I'm not saying that I channeled him, but in non-duality, there is no him,
No
and so
him.
it's one
Yeah.
field anyway. So
Yes.
maybe it was just like, oh, it would be interesting to do this. Who's tuning in? Who's listening? Who can we get through to? And Yes, so which leads us really on to this about guides. I know that sometimes you interview people and they're often talking about guides and
Mm-hmm.
mediumship, and Christianity is a big no-no on that. But you
Yeah.
see, when you have the non-dual understanding and perspective, it isn't about separate things. It's all one field anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard some of the near-death experiences talk about guides as people that you may not even know, but they were just experts in their field and they can
Yes,
guide you. So this
yes.
is very
You have
beautiful.
access to all the information, which is
Mm-hmm.
really what connective healing. It's energy, light, and information. So it's talking about this field whereby so much opens up. Whole world opens up,
Yeah.
and it's just such a delight. This non-dual. I'm so pleased to have been introduced to non-duality through
Mm-hmm.
people
Yeah.
like Lisa Cairns is one. I think her name is Lisa Cairns and Rupert Spira and David Bingham. They're just a
Yeah.
few people that I can resonate with well. But because you trust being in the present moment a lot more. You think all I have to do is give attention and I
Yeah.
can really trust that what needs to come through will come through.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're in dualistic, you take yourself, that small self, so much more seriously. And it's
Mm-hmm.
a this Jesus again, the burdens I give you are only light. It's a
Yeah.
burden when you have to plan everything and you think, I must rehearse, I must memorize this, I must know what to say. Like even for today now, I could, oh, I need to have lots of notes.
Yeah.
But when moment it flows because we're just turning up and and life is so much more joyous when you
Yeah.
can do that.
Oh, yes. That's a beautiful description, Jill. That light burden, you're right. And I
Yeah.
think when we get into that creative zone,
Mm,
then we set aside our small selves also.
mm.
I think that's
Yes.
another way we experience it in that
Yeah.
moment. So,
Right.
I do have another question for you. Our time's about to run out, but
Yes.
I am not done talking to you, Jill. There is so much we have to talk about. We'll try to make this one quick. I will. Faith shifting, people that are
Mm,
sort of wanting or having these non-dual experiences, and then the resistance comes up from the dualistic beliefs and whatnot,
mm,
right? So when we
mm,
are in this shift,
mm.
I know you help people do that as well. Do you have any words of advice for those of us who may be experiencing that shift? And, you know, what can we do to support ourselves?
It's trusting that ground of being. I think that I tell a story of a time when I was at the end of my tether through things that were happening, and I was almost like looking into the abyss, and I just didn't even know. I couldn't even pray to God or my old ideas of God. And something said to me, "It's going to be okay. You're okay. I am here for you. I was with you at the beginning, and I'm going to be with you at the end." And I get emotional when I say this, and I knew it wasn't God. Or I knew it, no, I rephrase that. I knew it wasn't something outside of me. It wasn't like how you wasn't talking to Jesus. It was it was me talking to me. And
Mm,
that I think probably was my first experience of non-duality. But then it also, I thought, this is true that I can say that the one thing that was with me at the very beginning as a child was my conscious awareness. And the one thing that will be with me right at the end is my conscious awareness. And
mhm,
that's always been a constant in my life. And so that's completely irrespective, like Rupert Spira says, this is something, a deeper truth about who you really are. It's this self-inquiry than all the thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that come and go, ideas, concepts. It's beyond the place of concepts. So
mhm,
what we often do when we're deconstructing is we're having to displace, take to bits our faith and look at the one bit and think about it. And it can be we tie ourselves up in knots. We can punish ourselves for it. We can feel guilty about letting go of this and that feeling. We can almost also feel a sort of a nostalgia for it. And it can be a sadness.
mhm,
We can grieve for the things we let go.
mhm,
I can remember thinking, I'm not right ready to let go of Jesus as my savior.
mhm.
I remember writing that as a comment on Rupert Spira, actually. And the lovely thing is, there's a gentleness that comes back with it that says, you don't have to, because in a way, he still is.
Yes,
You're the human being, he still is.
yes,
And if that's the very last thing that I let go of, as I say in my latest video, before I go into the field of that place of light where you
yeah,
let go, sometimes non-dualists come on to get cross with me and say, you can't have any beliefs, even the belief that you're a soul, if you're a non-dualist, so you shouldn't be calling yourself a non-dualist. So even if the very last thing that I let go of is the idea that of Jesus or of even being a soul, it doesn't matter because what will be beyond that is only what is true, and I only want what is true, and
Yes.
that will be the love,
Yes.
the Christ, the logos, if we want to say, if you want to use the Christian term, but it's beyond even all concepts,
Yes.
and that's real faith. That's why it's a deepening of faith.
Mm-hmm.
An irony, Pooja, that some people think that to deconstruct is a losing of faith, or to become a non-duality, you're losing faith,
Oh.
because you're really just growing. You're outgrowing something. You're outgrowing a pair of shoes that feels a bit too tight, and the truth is that God will never hem you, say to you, you have to stay within that. Wherever you go and stretch, wherever you stretch yourself to,
Mm-hmm.
can't outstretch God. They'll always be there beyond you. He's always the beyond,
Yes.
the
Yes.
love of God, the grace. It's always beyond. And that love is intimate, you see.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just an abstract kind of I don't know, a place of consciousness. Consciousness, it can be a little word that's a bit out. It's intimacy. It's loving.
Mm-hmm.
And so I suppose I would, I just say to people, trust is letting go. When you let go of everything, it'll still be there. And that's true faith. The love will
Mm-hmm.
still be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful, Jill.
Yeah.
That's very, to me, when I'm listening to you, I keep hearing in my head, the kingdom of God is inside us,
Mm,
right?
mm,
It's
mm,
nowhere else. It,
mm.
it really is inside us,
Yeah.
and also becoming
Yeah.
like little children, right? Jesus
Hmm.
did say that. And
Yes.
I think in the beginning, at least, they're very non-dualistic,
Yes.
right? They have no other way to be. Their brains
Yeah.
aren't even
Yes.
developed.
And they're in the present moment, aren't they? They're not thinking, so present. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I can talk to you forever. The hour has gone by like 1 minute. I've
Yeah, it's
had
been a
so much
delight.
fun, Jill.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you, thank you, and thank you. And those, I do have, yes, the book. I don't want to forget that. So the name of the book is My Forgiveness Journal. And
Yes.
is it available on Amazon?
It is. My Forgiveness Journal, Jill Brennan, should get you to it. It's 40 Days of Ho'oponopono, but you should get to it perhaps just by putting My Forgiveness Journal, if you put Jill Brennan, and it
Yep.
will be there. Thank you very
And
much.
yeah,
Yes.
I will have the link to that, and I'll have the link to your website because I'm assuming that's the best way to contact you is through your website.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
And I want people to go to your YouTube channel, Jill. That has literally been a healing balm for me. So I will
Thank you
have
so
the link to
much.
that as well. Thank you
Hmm.
for taking your time to speak with us today. Thank
Oh,
you.
bless you. Thank you so much. God
Thank
bless.
you.